Wrong. I don't know what that was, but so we'll now be moving on to the second speaker. So Murali is coming to us, and his academic research is concerned with the disavowal of caste in media and communication studies in digital culture. He is a faculty fellow, race and technology at Data and Society, and is currently working on the remanifestation of caste and social hierarchies in digital cultures, such as caste hate speech, open data, and platform economies. In addition, he's written numerous research and policy reports, briefs on ICT policies, internet governance, and caste-related digital cultures. I think we're just handing over control of the screen to him at the moment, and then we're all ready to go with our second keynote. Murali, are you there? Are you okay to, is your audio all working fine?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, brilliant. Okay, well, look, I'll just hand over straight to you and let us know if you have any issues and we can help solve them.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Right. I guess I can start now, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I think my keynote my talk will be slightly different and it will be slightly pitched differently. Unlike the previous speaker, I'm here to, sorry, let me take this. Unlike the previous speaker, I'm here to introduce a particular topic that's been long ignored when talking about fairness, hate speech, offense, and slander, slur, and when annotating filters and so on and so forth. It's about caste. And I'm not quite sure how many are here familiar with the caste as a social hierarchy or category. Only if you know, you can say yes, because I tend to think that there'll be less number of yes than no. So I think I should take it that not many people are aware of caste as a social system. So my talk today will be to, in some sense, selling that why caste is important when actually talking about fairness principles and when talking about caste hate speech. Sorry, can anyone see me? Because I'm not able to see myself. So it's very funny. Never mind. Not
yeah. You can see you.
Okay, cool. So my talk is to actually today is to convince all of you, at least most of you, and invite you to think about why caste has been missing in this debate. For example, if you look at the previous speaker, I was absolutely bowled over by his talk, but to me is that that talk did not include caste as a sort of a labeling or annotation. So that's the problem where I come from. And let me just explain to you what caste is about. And my background is not, I'm not a coder, I'm a qualitative ethnographer. I combine communication and cultural studies, and I apply to this computational and digital cultural practices. So I come from a sociology and a cultural anthropology background, just so you know. So do not expect me to talk about coding and all that. However, I've done my homework, so I'll be able to say that where I'm coming from and what's missing in the current internet, the making of the internet, and how do we make the internet cost sensitive. That is going to be I'm going to sell that point to you guys. And hopefully at the end of the day, at the end of my talk, I want someone, at least one or two of you, to be excited. Oh, this is really interesting, and I haven't thought this through. Maybe we should think about it. And that will be the indicator, expected outcome of my talk, so to speak. So caste is a sort of a inherited identity, and sort of it kind of works as it works through endogamous practices. Let me put it this way. I mean, it is determined at the time of your birth. So you can't escape from that identity until the time you die, because it has got some religious sanctions, but also social practices, which I'll come to in a minute. But mostly caste generally means ranked social assigned identities assigned at birth. To give you a very crude example, if you were born into a caste group that has been assigned to do manual scavenging work, which means you have to carry human excreta, feces, deal with that. That's your assigned occupation. Let's put that as an example. Then there is a caste group that exists to do that, and it's really shameful, and it affects your dignity, and it's humiliating. And if you're born in that caste group, you can't actually be escape from that. True, modernity dictates that you might move into a city or you might go to other place. Now you have more employment opportunities. However, the very identity that you belong to that caste group determines your opportunity, your access to capital, your access to privilege and everything. And also it actually, it means lots of social oppression. And if you're a woman, especially, then your chances of being violated and raped, and it's very, very high. And as per some statistics says that there are about 15 Dalit women being raped on a daily basis. That's actually a reported case, just so you know. The reason why I'm saying is that explaining this caste system, the caste system thrives on oppression, humiliation, similar to racism and misogyny. However, and why this is very important, and not only because is happening, but also it affects a huge amount of population in the world. It's so much so it affects 2 billion people. It affects 2 billion people. That's about 25% of world's population are directly affected by caste system, home to South Asia. But now caste system also has gone has gone global. For example, if you had noticed anybody, the recent caste discrimination case that happened in Cisco in Silicon Valley, where two dominant castes, this is how the system works. You have dominant caste, or on the top of the chain is that you have so-called Brahmins, and the lower rung is the one I just talked about, people who do manual scavenging or other thing. It's actually called Dalits, D-A-L-I-T-S. Dalits means broken people in Marathi. I don't want to give a long lecture, but I think this is very important to set the context before I delve into it. And that is why, so kindly bear with me. You will not regret. So in the Cisco Silicon Valley case, very recently, two Brahmin colleagues have found out that one of his colleagues was actually belonged to Dalits, or someone like I mentioned about, manual scavenging person, belonging to manual scavenging group. And then what happened was these two dominant caste techie workers outed the poor Dalit techie worker, and as a result, and he had to endure lots of discrimination on work side. No promotion was given, no distribution of responsibility. Eventually, he complained to HR, nothing worked, and then he resigned. Now, where the case is that California state is planning to sue the company. The point I'm trying to make here is that caste is not only affecting South Asia; it's gone global. And where I sit in London, in the UK, the UK caste is very much an issue that's been recognized by the government. So even though the primary source of this particular atrocious behavior and practice comes from South Asia, it has now gone global. And very interestingly, the Valley has lots of South Asians, and these South Asians, typically Indians, Hindu Indians. And these Hindu Indians typically represent, many of them represent these dominant caste groups. And as a result, they often actually they are not interested in reimagining fairness principles from anti-caste perspective in aid of their own privilege, if that makes any sense. And that's a sort of a interesting initial context to set in. But why do we talk about caste in this meeting? And first of all, it's a socially discriminating category that is similar to race, misogyny, and transphobicness, and so on, and similar to that. So therefore, we have to. And secondly, casteism is actually a caste conversation, and casteist practices are teeming in the internet and in digital cultures. And most worryingly, the internet has not waken up to any of this. I was in a recent meeting at the EU when they talked about human rights and human rights and hate speech forum. And when I introduced this, and they agreed in principle, but there was there wasn't there was no political will to actually acknowledge, okay, let's take this forward. And that is a really problematic one. Not just it's not that I'm blaming you or something. It's just that It takes a while to internalize, oh, this is really a problem. And that is really strange, because caste is one of the oldest form of social discriminations ever existed on this world. Whereas, we've seen some of the recent additions to this, to the discriminating protected characteristics, so to speak, but we haven't actually come to the consensus to agree caste is actually protected characteristics, and that needs to be looked at with empathy, with seriousness in the internet culture. So that's really interesting. However, and I must say that even though I started with a very grim note, the internet is empowering what I call Dalits and oppressed caste people. So in the internet as a disruptive force is actually opening up to opening up these barriers. And for example, Dalits who could not find their own voices before in the mainstream media, that are the legacy media, print and television, satellite television, they have found alternative spaces in the internet. So and they they're participating in the internet. They're talking loudly, and this change has also led to the organic production of Dalit-led media outlets and producing their own content, similar to at some point, there was Black-owned media, and similar sort of efforts are happening in South Asia and outside as well. And particularly for Dalit women who have been doubly oppressed, not just by caste, but also by patriarchy. The intersectional, the twin oppressions of caste, they have found a space on Twitter and Facebook as well. And well, so that looks good. And they also have found solidarity between each other, even though they haven't met each other in previously. Now there is this sort of a virtual solidarity, virtual mobilization. All this is happening. And that all seems to be a very good story. So far, so good. But also the internet also has exposed Dalits, especially women and other oppressed caste members, to a vast number of abuses. So let's put this way, the political economy of the internet access is still actually skewed and favors dominant caste groups, not the Dalit ones, even though Dalit people have their access is significantly increased. But even then, the level of the interaction is asymmetrical. The power dynamics is very clearly, outweighed by the dominant caste people, which is nothing but an extension of what's happening in the society for thousands of years. So one has to bear in mind, even though the idea of the Dalit participation on the internet is increasing, it is also opening up a very interesting stereotype. There is what we call Dalit internet. There is what we call mainstream internet practices. So, and this needs to be looked into the context that this is happening not just in the private home or private domain, but it's happening in the on the social media platforms or chat rooms or the Reddit side of places, or in e-commerce sites. So this is actually happening in a wider ecosystem that's largely managed by Western companies, and this is where the question is that the West also has the Western internet structure and the Valley and other tech companies, including Indian companies, have a greater role to play to mitigate this casteism on the internet. This is and so what I'd like to do is that I'd like to pick a few key examples to see that how the internet is actually oblivious to casteist practices. So I'd like to approach that from various point of view, and then end with a set of what I think that needs to happen, and also what I would expect from someone from you guys to say, oh, this is interesting. I'd like to have a discussion on where do we go forward. So it is not that I'm offering any solutions or so. I'm actually unpacking what's out there. It is going to be slightly messy. So I invite you, I look at you guys to say, oh, we can do that. We have an example of how to resolve it. Can we do something about it? So that's the sort of the direction that I'm actually angling at through this talk. Right, going back to what I missed, what I lost. So I said I will give you different examples of how the internet is actually oblivious to casteism. The first one is fairness principle. When we talk about the machine learning practices and fairness principle in the internet, one theory that often comes, that's often actually talked about, is John Rawls' theory of justice. I don't want to actually, I'm not going to do, please don't worry, I'm not going to explain entire John Rawls' theory of justice, but I'll just say one thing. One of the important aspects of his theory of justice is the impartiality test. That is actually being impartial to everybody, right? So bear that in mind. And so the impartiality test can be, it's actually built on distributive justice. So everyone gets the same share and everyone gets the same amount of access, and everyone is equally empowered. That's a sort of a principle behind it. Now, impartiality test can be problematic. I'll give you an example. Let's say that there are 3 kids and you have 1 guitar. And you can use the impartiality argument to justify why the guitar should go to all 3 kids in different contexts. For example, you can say this kid is the best playing guitarist in of the 3, so that he should get that. That's the impartial test. When you apply that, who's the best player, he gets the highest mark, so he can actually have the guitar. The second person can say, I am the let's say I'm the sort of oh, I'm just looking at it. I'm the poorest of the lot, he can say. He can invoke social justice impartiality test. So if you apply that test, then the second kid actually is perfectly entitled to have his guitar. And the third person say, look, I actually crafted this guitar. So therefore, if you apply that test, then the third kid is entitled to have the impartiality, according to the impartiality test. And the internet of fairness principle is largely revolves around this sort of a Rawlsian theory of justice. Now, what happens is that when you apply a critical cost thinking behind this, then this particular idea gets problematized. I'll give you an example of what actually happened 2 years ago when the Silicon Valley company called Shadi.com, when they, Shadi.com is a South Asian matrimonial site for South Asian community, let's put that way, and it's global, and it's registered in the Valley, and the owner is an American of South Asian origin, I think Indian origin. So this website allows everybody to, or anybody who wants to sign up for their to find matches, they can do that. And when they do their profiling, there is one particular, this is a common site for everybody to come in, okay? Even though it is designed as it's built as a South Asian, for South Asian community, in principle, anybody can become part of that website. So if you profile your, if you profile yourself, and there are various filters and labels that you have to fill in. One is, one asks the question, what is your, would you like to share your caste? Would you like to reveal your caste identity, right? And if you fill that identity, then what automatically the algorithm did was, the algorithm will shut down all other caste group from being matched with you. In other words, the algorithm is a casteist algorithm, and you have to understand such practices, public practices, are punishable by offense in several South Asian countries. Such, that is like pretty much saying it's for only white people only. That it's the equivalent of that assertion. Now, when Shadi.com was questioned in the mainstream media, and there was an expose. In fact, it's very interesting to note this expose happened in the Times newspaper in the UK, because there was a British Asian who wanted to profile herself, and then found that this turned out to be the casteist algorithm. Then that became a big news in the UK. That's another point for us to remember: caste is going global. So this person, then when the media expose happened, Shadi.com made a very interesting argument. It invoked the impartiality test, and it said, everybody has the opportunity to, we don't promote casteism, but if the customer wants to invoke their privilege, it is something similar to, we prefer taller people, we prefer short people. Now that's really problematic before we unpack that. But this is the problem with impartiality test. And Shadi.com was able to articulate that in public without any shame or guilt. So what my point here is that how even the philosophical and legal principles that are rooted in the internet system can be unconsciously or unwillingly, without being aware of it, can be casteist. And if you apply social justice fairness method in terms of fairness principle, then you have a completely different method. I'll give you an example. The same principle, when the same thing happens in my country, newspapers in India, for example, if the newspaper publishes only so-and-so can only be apply for this particular matrimonial position or whatever, then it becomes a big issue. So, I mean, it still continues in India. We are not far from perfect, but it is an issue. So my point is that the internet can actually be fine-tuned to be cost sensitive. And the reason why it is not happening for two reasons. One is the people who run these machines, in this case, the American of Indian origin, himself actually believes in such values. That's which is very shameful. And secondly, there was no as a code of conduct or agreed consensus within the tech communities that this is bad. We have to build cost sensitive internet. That consensus is lacking. So that is what I'm trying to point out from the philosophical basis and legal basis. That's one example. In fact, if you want to check in Facebook, not necessarily Twitter, Facebook, and in many other online groups, you have what you call Tamil, which is an ethnic reference, Tamil Brahmin. Brahmin is the dominant caste group, Tamil Brahmin group. And that is like saying that similar to having a white only supremacist group, that it's not allowed, even though sometimes it can exist, but it is technically the internet standard has a consensus that it is not allowed. But that consensus itself is missing when you talk about caste. So that is the problem. So my point is not here to say how it needs to be done. My talk is actually focusing on why this has not been recognized, that is affecting 2 billion people in the world's population, right? So you can, going back to the Facebook example, there is a Facebook group called Tamil Brahmin Facebook group. And when you want to become a member of that group, they will ask you very caste specific questions to verify that you actually belong to that caste group. Only then you will be allowed inside. And once you go inside, which I managed to, it was full of unbelievable casteist content. So I think the very nature that such a group exists itself actually shows that the disavowal of a caste in tech industry. So that's my point. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I also, Leon in his previous talk mentioned about how do we actually address the visual content. Right. And here is an interesting example. TikTok and Instagram, they have become such popular, not in a sense, viciously popular space where users, South Asian users assert their caste pride. That even resulted in the killing of a few people in southern states of India. And the Wired magazines ran a very long analytical piece that how TikTok, especially before they banned in India, it became became vitriolic and viciously casteist. And that the other problem here is that what I'm trying to connect this one with is with the internet's obliviousness in terms of its role, its play in terms of culturing caste. Let me explain what do I mean by culturing caste. The internet has become a marketplace for caste pride. One of the problems for this is that the manipulation of multiculturalism in the West, manipulation of multiculturalism by South Asians living in the West. Let me unpack this. So if there's been an ongoing tussle going on in the UK with regards to the Equality Act, and the Equality Act at the moment recognizes caste as one of the protected characteristics, although the government is planning to remove that caste from the protected characters anytime. That's a long story. I'm part of the campaign. We have miserably failed, but I'm not going into that. But one of the reasons why it happened was one of the campaign advocacy mechanisms they did was in the West, especially it's post-internet, many casteist practices are being touted as cultural practices. A good example is vegetarianism. No one accepts, especially not only South Asians living in the West, but also the growing religious bigotry in South Asia as well. Now they kind of recirculate their caste practices into cultural practices. And this is actually gaining, because the internet community, or the machine learning coders and others, because they are not very much sensitive to the caste-related behavior or social system, they have no clue. For example, there is a very interesting website called Brahmin.com. And if you, that's very interesting. You can't have a racialized name.com, but it is still Brahmin.com is now well accepted in the community. And interestingly, it is owned by a commercial brand by an US entrepreneur. And it's a very interesting thing about the website is that it's an apparel designing website. They said under about the brand, they said why they've chosen the name Brahmin. And they say Brahmin means the cultured and most the wisdomful, blah, 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 all positive attributes, right? Now, this is a very important thing. You can't have such kind of a narrative with regards to a white supremacist an expression, but it is all over the place when it comes to casteism. I'll give you another example. This is a slightly older example, slightly complicated example, but just to give you why the internet is, why we should pay more attention to the internet. It's a cost-sensitive internet, or making internet to be more cost-sensitive. Some of you may have used the word pariah in their texts or writing or speaking and so on and so forth. So the word pariah actually is a derogatory term where I come from, because it refers to a particular Dalit caste group, and it's been there for a very long time. People have been fighting to remove that word from Oxford Dictionary. It's not happening. That's all fine. That's one thing. But now with the digital culture, the word pariah is actually, it's just everywhere. The cross circulation, pre-internet, the word existed, but without the fluidity and cross circulation. But now it is possible to call, and as South Asian or an Indian is possible to call another person pariah, and it goes absolutely unpunished, because the English machine, the machine learning practices think it's a genuinely acceptable term. But previously, it was used in a certain domain. It got circulated in certain groups. But now, because of the misunderstanding of the text, now an Indian can call fellow Indian a pariah, which is actually a slur, and it's punishable offense by local act. But it can still happen in the internet world, and community standards cannot do anything about it. So this is the sort of nuances that one should pay attention to, how the internet is actually needs to be fine-tuned to be more sensitive to this 2 billion population. And similarly, if you Google, for example, Jat, Thakur, yoga, or Brahmin or Dalit, not only the text messages, but also images like Google or Getty or any, I would say, I would encourage you to search images, especially the professional image selling platforms. It's unbelievably stereotypical. And who writes these codes? I have no clue. And I think there should be some sort of a public funded, a public initiative, crowd-funded initiative from people like me and people like you guys to sit together and thrash out what needs to happen to do this. Because such filtering, if you go to Getty Images, for example, and then type Brahmin, search for a Brahmin related image, all you get is that God-loving, ritual observing, prosperous and techie Brahmins, and there is no sensitivity where I would say, how can you actually call it is not about individual, it is about an oppressive labeling is being considered to be celebratory. That's my point. I'm not talking about a particular person or against individuals. So so there's something that who actually vets this data producers, and who what kind of a data science is actually behind producing this sort of algorithm and insights, and why this trend is perpetuated. I'm dying to find out. In fact, I've been talking to a few people, but I'm using this opportunity to rise here as well. And similarly, if you look at if you look at platform economy, I'll give you an example of one platform. It's called bookmymate.com. It's operating out of Bangalore. Yeah, and this particular platform, what it does is to enable so-called middle-class people to locate or find their domestic help. And you have to understand, in India, domestic help is deeply personalized and very, very toxic relationship because of the caste hierarchy. And there's a class hierarchy as well. So they are very always, they are not treated as like fellow humans, so to speak, let me put that way. So when the bookmymate.com was introduced, it actually made a socially very emancipatory claim that we are actually revolutionizing and then actually, reclaiming dignity for this domestic help people, because we've been largely systematically oppressed on caste and gender and class grounds. And that seemed to be good. So far, so good. But then a latest research report found out that they have a caste filter of when hiring domestic help. You have a caste filter, so you can select your domestic mate, and many middle class people prefer relatively intermediary and dominant caste domestic help, not the Dalit and oppressed, or non-Hindus such as Muslim or Christians. This is happening in a tech city, Bangalore, just so you know. So now, how, I'm not sure, and then the research report went on to spoke to other the client service, platform services, who said, we do not have this sort of a cost filtering, but we do think such filtering would help our businesses. That's what they said. Now, I myself have looked at the backdoor dashboard of the bookmate.com, and I have had access to the discussion chat forum between the middle class people who hired this domestic help, and their chats were extremely casteist. For example, what is that person's name? Who calls themselves by this name? Because names can actually be an indicator, and annotating indicators to refer to one's caste group identity, so to speak. So there was this, this was all very shocking. You cannot, and there was no guilt, nothing of that sort, why this was happening. And people are gleefully, doing this. And we're very happy that this is, the internet is actually providing these sort of a caste spaces for them to be this bad or socially, unjust. So I think what we need some sort, again, as I said, we need some sort of resources to research, to unearth what's been going on. So so who's actually doing this sort of algorithm, and what's been happening not just in India but also in the Valley as well, like what happened in Shadi.com. So I am actually, my concern is that there's a lot that's need to be done, waiting to be done, and most dangerously, nothing has been done so far to mitigate this sort of offense, slur, and harassment of 2 billion population in the caste system in the world, So that's really, so what do we do? How do we measure and detect caste hate speech? That becomes the real question, key question. First of all, there needs to be willingness, and there needs to be some resource, and some element of policy level acknowledgement, not just at the technology company level, but also at the international agencies level. All that needs to happen. And to be fair, again, I've been very, I've been giving you a very grim picture, but to be fair, online platforms, have recognized caste as a protected characteristic, such as Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on and off. Yeah, but but acknowledging caste as a protected characteristics does not mean they have the capacities in place to address that. And that's the main thing. I know in the previous speaker, Leon mentioned about the sort of building capacities of content moderators. I just like to take that particular moment. I was thinking about my topic. If you look at content moderation in India, for social platforms with regards to caste-related practices, or about contents that's been generated, massively generated by South Asian population. They hardly have any content moderators, first of all, in India, especially Twitter. And Facebook has some moderator. They do have quite a few, not more than quite a few moderators. But again, the problem is social capital is the problem. Which again, Leon kind of mentioned about how do you choose moderators? Who are your targeted moderators? Because human moderation is actually a sort of a BPO units, and it requires capital, and this capital are always actually locked with dominant caste people. So what they consider casteism may not necessarily, what they consider normal may not necessarily be normal, but can be a casteist practice. And that may be a conscious practice, or that may be just because they have internalized their casteism so much. So there is that problem. And then obviously the company is not just the BPO, but also the tech companies are not actively pressurizing or pushing these content moderation company to ensure equality, diversity, inclusion, so that these contents may be moderated by the people who know exactly what these contents actually mean. And on a larger level, I have looked into the investments in terms of content moderation, and if you look at it's completely disproportionate to the region that actually promotes certain kind of content. For example, if you look at India in Facebook, they promote vast amount of content on a daily basis, but the investment relating to Facebook is not matching with that. And one of the things that what needs to happen in future, in the years to come, that social media platforms have to decentralize their content moderation. At the moment, most content moderation for South Asian content is happening in Philippines, and we don't know how much they're sensitive. I'm not underestimating their skill works, but these are very extremely nuanced topics. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is decentralization of the content moderation that needs to happen in the respective neighborhood or region. And the second thing is that there are certain methods. The other point is that, oh, okay, 2 minutes warning. Oh dear Lord. Okay, okay, then I'll skip that. Also, the caste sensitive verification methods. If you look at Facebook, Twitter, and all that, the way they verify users, they have to really come out with their original identity. And Dalit women are not comfortable about it because they get harassed, their pictures are actually downloaded, and they're virtually sex trafficked, and so on and so forth. So one needs to actually look into, again, sensitive way of doing this sort of verification and influencing processes in order to protect these already vulnerable group. And I have written only 2 minutes, so I can't really go with lots of stuff that I've written, but I can only say that the last one point, this is data and transparency. I think we need to demand what kind of a disaggregated data with regards to cost, from in terms of their content moderation, complaints, and then what actions have been taken. These are all completely not transparent, but these are transparent for other protected characteristics. So these are some of my initial thoughts to kind of actually invite you guys to think with me why we should pay more attention to build the cost sensitive internet from critical cost inquiry point of view. Thank you so much.